Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's SMC Substack Live. As usual, we have a phenomenal slate of conversationalists ready to discuss some of the most pressing issues in our space today. So, this week, we turn our focus to two entities. First, a growing movement, people versus big tech, fighting to overturn the predatory business model of giant tech corporations and change the internet for good, something SMC thinks about 24/7. In addition to this movement, we want to discuss the surge of new AI products, specifically this week with the limited launch of Sora 2. What does an app with this capacity mean for movements like ours and people versus big tech? So we want to have this much larger conversation, but shrink it into these 30 minutes. But let's jump right in. But first, we want to introduce our lovely speakers joining us today. So I'd like to introduce you to Mia Spire, a phenomenal researcher and digital activist working with people versus big tech. She is based in London, where she leads work on social media safety, responsible AI, and digital safeguarding as digital resilience lead at Shared Planet. She also co-leads WISE London, a global network for women in safe and ethical AI, and was just added to our next gen board. So welcome, Mia. Next, we have our lovely Sarah Martin. Sarah, as many of you know, was an SMC fellow this summer, and now she's continuing her education at Columbia to obtain an MBA. Sarah is a dedicated member of not only SMC, but also the tech advocacy community. Sarah's technical background allows her to add depth and realism to our conversations, and we are incredibly grateful that she has continued on at SMC as a next gen board member. So thank you for coming back into this conversation, Sarah. But let's just dive right in. So starting with people versus big tech. Mia, you've been at the forefront of youth-centered research on how social media design impacts mental health. So talk us through what you're seeing right now that's most concerning or most hopeful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Emma, for having me on this conversation. And it's so nice to get to speak alongside you, Sarah. As you mentioned, I've been helping to lead the research arm of People versus Big Tech for a few months. The organization focuses on a number of things, including really challenging the power and the abuses of big tech. But something that is particularly important to the organization is elevating the voices of young people in online safety discussions. Um, Kind of the impetus for the research really comes from youth perspectives and people versus big tech's interest in incubating something called Control Alt Reclaim, which is Europe's first youth-led tech justice movement. And so both organizations and movements came together to commission a piece of work that looked at how social media is impacting the young people of mental health. And specifically how it's impacting young people's mental health by design, which is this idea that these platforms and the way that they're built, either not intentionally or oftentimes intentionally, is actually harmful to their users and really prioritizes a world in which profit means more than people and people's well-being. And I think that, of course, these addictive features, everything from algorithms to infinite scrolling to ephemeral content, impacts all users. Like, even my parents who scroll social media can become victims of these addictive features. But what is especially important is the recognition that young people, they're still developing cognitively, they're figuring out their ways in the world. They rely on social media because they've been sold this promise of connection and collaboration. But at the same time, these features are adversely impacting people who are still growing and finding their ways online, even into their late 20s. So really, there's this kind of unique and adverse harm that young people face. And I think maybe one of the most important things I would mention is that while there's so much research out there about the kinds of features that are harmful, so in the EU and in the UK in particular, we're really looking at like dark patterns and addictive design features that get young people to accidentally or not accidentally spend money online or accept strangers' follow requests or not understand privacy settings. Like, there's a lot of research out there that tells us what features are harmful, but there's less research out there that focuses on what do young people actually want from safer online spaces. Like, let's hear what they have to say. Let's listen to them. Let's not just ban them from social media altogether, but let's figure out a way in which we can. Sorry. let's figure out a way in which we can work with these communities, and many of whom come from diverse backgrounds, to really build better platforms together. And so that's what the research is focused on. And I think in the same way that it can be really exhausting to look at the online safety landscape and look at the plethora of risks and just kind of really kind of David and Goliath situations. I think Emma, you put it that way once to me. That can be overwhelming, but I'm equally super optimistic about how much young people care about making safer digital spaces and how much they want a voice in this space. And that's what this research is trying to do.
Absolutely. And I know your work specifically spans activism to research to advocacy across organizations from like Columbia's like the Knight Institute to Oxford to People vs. Big Tech. So what have you learned about the power and the limits of such advocacy and driving these changes you want to see in platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and this is me speaking from my own experience, but like advocacy is one part of like the larger ecosystem of trying to drive forward changes and make safer online spaces. Like, first of all, young people are not always invited into the room or have a seat at the table. And even when they do have a seat at the table, like their mic not like kind of figuratively, their might not be on, like their changes might not be actually implemented after the fact. I spoke with a few queer advocacy organizations and youth representatives who always said, we're always invited into the room and then they take a photo of us and then we leave and we never really understand like how our presence impacted the conversation beyond just like a tokenistic photo op. So like advocacy is super important. There's so many wonderful advocacy orgs led by young people. I'm thinking about like Log Off Movement, to Sign It For Us, Control Alt Reclaim, that are kind of pushing for that change and putting pressure on their policymakers to make a difference. But the tough thing is, like at the end of these days, these are extremely powerful private corporations that are driven by profit that have an adverse impact on policy making, that are able to lobby for their own interests. And so unless these platforms are regulated by policymakers, unless there are restrictions on what they can and cannot do and incentives to be better, they don't necessarily need to listen to their users. And I think there are a few concrete examples where they'll roll something out, like a new feature or a product or a specific platform like Instagram teen accounts, in response and in reaction to like bad PR that they get and outrage from parents, from young people, from policymakers. But the issue is that we need all of this to be proactive. They need to not be rolling out these harmful features after they get a lot of heat. And they need to be doing this from the very beginning. And so I don't know the extent to which advocacy can make them do that, but we really need like tough regulation and robust accountability mechanisms to ensure that they actually fundamentally change and alter their business models.
And looking ahead as part of our next gen board, I think you've kind of touched on this, but talk us a little bit more through how you think youth leaders and these young leaders in the space can shape the conversation about building these digital spaces that are fair, free, and healthy for all.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you want experts in the room, you need to have young people. Young people are experts of their own online experiences. Like, it's one thing to speak to an academic about a study they conducted of thousands of young people across the world, but I mean, if you really want to hear about lived experience, like what it's like for me as like a 26-year-old who scrolls social media, who interacts with content, who used to run fan accounts when I was little, who's seen the changes of platforms from like Tumblr to Twitter to TikTok to Vine. Like you have to have me in the room. And that goes for most young people. Their online experiences are so different. And not only can they discuss the nuance of social media, so the positives and the negatives, but they can also provide that expertise about what, systemic design change they really want. I think it is a massive like deficit and failure of policymakers to exclude young people from these spaces, even accidentally, when really they're the ones who will be able to tell you these are what the harms are like. And yeah, I always find it funny when I read reports or news articles about like social media feeds or what the new trends are. And I feel like unless you're plugged into those spaces, it's actually quite hard to understand some of the social dynamics and the risks that underlie them. So yeah, I'd say that that's really important to make sure young people are active and meaningfully involved.
And I love that distinction. It's meaningfully to your point. Like you don't want to have this token youth person in the room. Like they are so much power behind lived experience that you want to be able to harness that and work with other generations to create meaningful solutions. And that's kind of at the heart of what SMC does, which is build intergenerational bridges to create those type of solutions.
Exactly.
Sarah, from your perspective as an outsider, someone who has recently become aware of people versus big tech, how do you feel about their goal, which is this fighting to overturn predatory business models? As someone who has worked within tech companies, do you think it's possible to push back against these entrenched models?
I think it's wonderful. And personally, I was really impressed when going through their website and seeing what they've achieved already throughout different countries. And some of it is really creative too. Um, when it comes to um, spamming the feed of political figures to demand change. And when I saw how much it actually worked, like they played a role in getting GDPR to be passed, this is major. And even though the leading tech business models we see now are focused more on like exploiting the behaviors of the consumer, what we learn when we're studying engineering and design is really to create something that is not only useful, but a joy to use.
Mhm.
And that's the heart of good product design. And it's completely possible. And it will just be more natural and intuitive to build things that are based on this. And so I think it's just waiting to happen.
hmm Exactly. And I think again at SMC we spend a lot of time thinking through, what would another business model look like? And I do believe that the answer to that and to kind of that exploration is going to come from, to your point, Mia, it's like young people, the individuals who understand better than anything what it's like to feel like what you said, Sarah, to be a kind of exploited consumer. But like let's move on to another rising movement, the rise of AI. So, now recently OpenAI has announced the launch of Sora 2, which people can use to create videos with cameos of themselves, friends, and others who grant permission. The new tool, which for now is only available by invitation, it promptly jumped to the top of Apple's App Store. And now there is this quote that, I always think of that was featured in the Social Dilemma when I see another major launch of any new innovative product. It's from Sophocles and it says, nothing vast enters the lives of mortal without a curse. Sounds it's very philosophical. It's very broad, but I think it encapsulates this moment kind of well, which is you have to understand that, you can have this great innovation, but at what cost? So for both of you, has has anyone gotten invited or two? And then I want to hear your first impression. So first I'll start with you, Mia.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get the invite, so feeling left out. Just kidding. But yeah, I mean, I'm concerned. I think that at the end of the day, like any one of the positives or the benefits that come with this, like maybe have to do with the general conversation about like creativity and pushing the boundaries of technology and innovation. Like that is interesting, but the real question to me is always like at what cost? So what's interesting to me is that with this new rollout, we're also seeing the creation of an app that encourages users to scroll through a TikTok-like feed. And so even an AI company is leaning into the short form video creation similar to Reels and TikTok and YouTube Shorts. And what I know from a platform safety perspective is that short form video is perhaps the most addictive and enraging and engaging type of content, and that also can further manipulate users. And so when you add an entire feed of AI into the mix, I have a lot of questions and I have a lot of concerns. And there are already reports about users either finding loopholes around existing guardrails for Sora, but some examples of that include like slopified AI videos about dead celebrities. So I saw this horrible video where it was like the scientist Stephen King being beat up in quite a brutal way that was generated by AI. Taylor Lorenz, like the social media and digital journalist, she revealed that like she, had a stalker who created AI videos using the new rollout of the platform about her. And so there's this real big concern about users using other users like image and likeness to create non-consensual videos. And that is a concern that's been existing for now almost a decade, which is the concern over non-consensual imagery and deepfakes. And I think, I mean, all of these concerns are like kind of scrambled in my head, but really the biggest one to me is that OpenAI rolled this out in kind of a trial by fire manner, it feels. And I've read a few reports that concur with that opinion, which is that if there were all these guardrails to begin with, why did any of this happen? And in the past week since the rollout, they've now started to walk back some of their features, put more safety blocks, and flag content and prevent users from making sort of content with other users, but it shouldn't have taken like one horrible week of like Armageddon with this platform to do that. And so it concerns me because it's, a giant platform with such responsibility, and this AI company should have done that from the very start, and yet users are still finding loopholes. So I'm very concerned. I'm nervous. And I also just have to plug quickly the environmental impact of this. I work for a company that also has an environmental mandate. It does a lot of environmental thinking around technology. And really, this is a very popular platform, like you said. And it's already reached such popularity within like a week and a half of its rollout. And yet, what we know about AI's environmental impact, specifically generative AI, is not good. So I'm concerned for people, and I'm also concerned for planet, just to summarize that.
Absolutely. And Sarah, I'm going to ask you the same question. What are your initial reactions and what should we be wary about as this reaches the hands of eager consumers across the globe?
I thought, wow, this is crazy. Just having social media and, like Mia said, the short form video, endless feed, and combine that with the supercharged AI tools, I think that that's a cocktail of just pure dopamine and addiction. And I thought definitely like this will be interesting how it will play out, because as an AI company making these AI tools, first of all, they're going to be focused on creating content that's engaging and very realistic. And so it's not really going to matter putting any kind of labels or anything like that. Maybe the best I could think of was maybe having a pop-up before the video shows, because otherwise no one is going to really pay attention to that. This might be AI after all. And I think that it's a little sad how it's being marketed as social media, because once you start introducing AI videos into it, it's not really a medium for connection anymore. And I think that the fact and fiction shouldn't be presented in the same feed like this, because they know what they're doing. And if people are already falling for more clearly fake videos, like you see like on YouTube or TikTok, then I don't know about this one. But I think that eventually, with the rise of organizations like People versus Big Tech and the advocacy and results that they've achieved, that OpenAI and similar platforms that follow their footsteps will have to take action towards this. And honestly, I am heartened by seeing in the comments, people will say like, this is AI. And I'm glad, because I'm like, okay, at least some people are speaking up and pointing it out. For all the people that don't get it, I admit that sometimes I get fooled too. So I'm like, oh, okay.
If I could hop on that, I completely agree with you, Sarah. I think it's like when you start mixing or when you create platforms that are purely intended to just create these fake videos, it's like, is this a connective platform? Like, what's the purpose of this really is the big question. If I could also add, I think that one of the other concerning elements to me is that this technology is evolving so fast. Like, there are constant updates, it's getting better. I remember seeing like the initial, like, Sora, Google VO videos of AI, and it's like a gymnast doing a black backflip, and like it can barely land the backflip. Like it's clearly a really bad video. And now it's just so advanced, and these companies are creating platforms themselves and becoming everything platforms. And so I think the concern to me is that like regulation and existing guardrails like can't keep up necessarily. And I think the biggest flashpoint of where we're seeing that right now with OpenAI is that the Motion Picture Association has like completely responded to this, being like, hey, you're using a lot of copyrighted content that you really should not be putting into your videos. And so there's a huge legal question surrounding this. But because the area of the law is still so confusing, like, do we just keep letting it happen until the law becomes clear? Like, that's the big question to me. And then the last thing, sorry, I'll say on this from the youth perspective, is that in my research on trying to uncover what young people would like from safer online spaces, it's really clear that a lot of young people are very tired of both the shitification of the internet and the slopification of the internet. So, like, the former being the breakdowns of platforms themselves, and then the latter, so slopification, being just the inundation of just like bad, low quality content online. And I think a lot of people have been just expressed feeling kind of like uninspired, exhausted, jaded by how much AI they see on their feeds. And so, like, who wants this? I think is the big question overall. On me speaking for myself, certainly not me, but yeah, I think that's just something we should also think about.
Yeah, no, I think that as a young person, echo the frustrations for both the shitification and the slopification. I also think the SOAR, specifically SOAR too. I actually got access to it. I was very interested, largely from a youth digital advocacy perspective and from my own curiosity. And I will tell you, it's the most scared genuinely I have been in a very long time when it comes to AI and its capacity to completely alter the online environment and how we determine what is true and what is false. Because, and as I undid my screen, this was like a video it made of me in an airport. And I genuinely sent it to a friend of mine, and they're like, "Is that not a real video of you?" And I think that the fact that my own friends and family are questioning whether or not a video is actually something that I took with my own voice is a harrowing sign that we are progressing into an era that we have to be very, very careful about how we maintain and how we track that progression, to your point, Mia, which is we shouldn't go in and trial by fire. We should be really proactively building guardrails and understanding what exactly it is that we are deploying. Because again, nothing vast enters the life of mortals without a curse. It's, I think, the same mentality here, which is we just really need to be more we understanding of the larger shifts that this will cause in our digital ecosystem, anthropological ecosystem, and just to us as human beings. Um, but I will say I want to jump into my favorite portion of the live because it's our open mic. And we've talked a lot, and I have talked a lot about the doom and the gloom of the current digital ecosystem and AI innovation and business models. But at SMC, we are like deeply techno optimistic. So let's talk a little bit about that in our conversation. So the question I will pose to both of you is I want you to think very hard about AI and the AI that you've consumed and used, and let listeners know what AI have you interacted with that has made you just happiest. And I'm going to start with you, Mia, and then I'm going to move on to you, Sarah. The answer could be nothing if it's nothing, but I do feel like there are some very positive uses of AI out there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think at the end of the day, like AI is just a term. Like it's an umbrella term that encompasses so many tools and use cases. So to say that AI is bad is to be like the computer is bad. Okay, well, what about the computer? What websites? What is it? How do you spend your time on the computer? What kind of computer do you have? So AI is a really umbrella term. So I think it's really easy to sweep with broad strokes, but sometimes we have to pull it back a little. And to your question, like for what it's like, I'm very optimistic as well because I speak to so many people who care and like surround myself with youth advocates and people who care about like tech justice and thinking about safety and responsibility. I think specifically to your question about like what AI do I feel like inspired by and positive about. Well, firstly, I think this is kind of separate from content generation, but on the environmental front, I think there's a real big concern, especially among young people. I mean, climate change and climate crisis is one of the number one concerns of our generation. But I think there's a real opportunity for AI tools, not necessarily generative, but just AI generally, to aid the green transition and to help companies and countries achieve their net zero goals much better. And specifically, we can look at energy and how AI is optimizing energy, but that's a whole topic for another Substack Live and less to do with media and media integrity. But I think when it comes to media integrity and safer online spaces, as much as AI can flood your feed with a bunch of crazy, toxic lies and strange content, it also is one of the most important tools we have to keeping up with that. And AI is a double-edged sword, so it can automate content moderation in ways and at scale and with speed that like a human being could never achieve. And so when it's done well and with the right guardrails, of course, it's an essential tool to helping flag and detect things like hate speech or harmful content or CSAM, which is child sexual abuse material, in a way that we've like could have never dreamed of without these tools. And so I think it really is a question of, okay, if we know that these tools can be leveraged for good and can be used to help users, like how can we do that? And who are the partners that we can use to make this happen? The one specific case study I'll shout out is that the UN has piloted and launched a hate speech monitoring tool and dashboard that's driven by AI called eMonitor Plus. And in some of the other work that I do outside of People versus Big Tech for my company Shared Planet, I speak a lot with humanitarian organizations who rely on this tool to help them monitor speech before elections, for example, and make sure that the discourse online is either like sustainable, healthy, and safe. And so yeah, it's a big double-edged sword. And so I think it's really the matter of like lending the power and the voices to the organizations, the companies, and the people that are leveraging this technology for the better.
Mm, absolutely. And on to you, Sarah.
Actually, my answer for this was very simple, because this week I used ChatGPT to create a study abroad itinerary because the school deadline for applying for a scholarship for the study abroad was this week. And the way it works is that if you're very familiar with the country, you can apply to lead the trip. Um, and I thought, I really want to go to Germany. I've never been before, but I will apply and I'll create a perfectly balanced itinerary. I used ChatGPT and I cross-verified it with some of my friends. And I was actually really happy that I got it. So um, it was just a simple thing, but I was just thinking that it made it so easy. Um,
Mhm.
and even though I did have to do the work of double checking that everything worked, um, and tweak around some things, it just made me think like there are so many things that I would maybe not be able to do because I simply wouldn't have had the time. But this helps me be more productive.
I've actually also used chat for I've used chat for a lot, but I've used chat for helping build trip plans and get meal suggestions and it to your point, like I think you do have to go through the due diligence of checking and making sure that it's accurate. But I think it provides great information and it does provide that at a speed at which it would have taken us both hours to come up with these larger itineraries. Um, so I want to thank you for sharing that and thank you to Mia. I we definitely will have you back on to have a larger conversation between AI and the planet and that kind of interaction, because I think that's often goes undiscussed, at least in the larger tech advocacy conversation. But I want to thank you both of our conversationalists, Sarah and Mia, for sharing such wonderful insights with us. I know I speak for all the listeners when I say this, but we are grateful for both of you that you're involved in the fight, which is really a fight, to build this better digital world for generations to come. So thank you for everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next week.